You are now listening to the Low Hanging Fruits podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Low Hanging Fruits. I am Lauren,
I'm Constance.
I'm Elyssa.
And I'm Bhang.
and we have a very special, informative, lovely episode for you today.
Yes.
We have a
What are we
piece
talking about?
by this fellow that we're going to read.
yes.
um,
Paul Mattick.
Who is this Mattick? I've never heard of him.
German emigre to the United States. Left communists. You can consider like a council communist, or rather, well, you can also say like a heterodox Marxist.
Did he consider himself like a council communist?
I mean, he wrote about them a lot, but okay. Well, I'm just gonna say it, but like council communism doesn't actually exist. It's just because they. Oh God. Okay.
No, that's what I was getting at. Is that like
It's just because
you kind of have to be careful with a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm. But
for
simplicity's sake, you won't
criticizing my co-host here. I'm just like
I know.
I'm just like we gotta just
It-
one of the
it-
things
it-
that always gripes me when we talk about communism in history is like people get sorted into these boxes that are really not necessarily representative of what they thought.
And Maddox does not fit in many boxes because he's like a Grossmanite, but midway, and so his economic theory is actually one of the weird contradictions, or not contradictions, but like why Maddox I would say is like probably one of the best like representative of his tendency is because Panikek wasn't that big on the crisis stuff, and he is because he read Grossman, but he isn't exactly a Grossmanite. Now, this matters because Maddox's claim to fame is a book called Marx and Keynes, which is just him presenting Marxist theory, or just like the economic thought of Marx, and also like his own interpretation. And that book is a criticism of Keynesianism, but also it contains a criticism of it's a criticism of Keynesianism, state socialism, which doesn't call state socialism, he just calls it state capitalism. And it's the reason he wrote that is because, you know, being an emigre during the Great Depression, fresh off of like almost like getting shot probably several times during Weimar, the Weimar days. He wrote a lot about the Great New Deal, not the Great New Deal, right? The New Deal, and FDR, and he was very attuned to a lot of like the milieu, right? The economic milieu. So if you look him up, like you can find him like doing takedowns of like Samuelson or Hayek or like of like so many people that like. His criticism is like very cutting, and this leads into this piece, which actually isn't. It is an economic piece, but not in the kind that like Mattick would usually write, because it is very how to say, it's political theory informed by like basically like his whole life's work, because that's like one of the last texts he writes before he dies. Because I think wait, what's the date already on this text? I think it's I looked up the date. It was 1979, and he died in 81. And like, let's just say his last years weren't exactly pleasant. And so this text is mostly it takes the U.S. as he saw it, like right before, because this text written right before Reagan, right, 79. So we get a glimpse at like, you know, a very refined communist just looking at like American democracy and like the American reach throughout the whole world, and talking about the situation at home and abroad and how those two relate. I feel that'd be a good way to talk to like introduce this piece, because this piece talks about a lot, so it's hard to.
So this piece, let's give it a title. Let's give it a name.
Yeah, let's call
this. This is Authority and Democracy in the United States, published in 1979 by Paul Mattick. well, it was written by Paul Mattick. We have this on Marxist.org, the last good website on the internet, and it's a discussion of essentially American politics and the American system of democracy.
And a very
Spit on
sharp
parliaments.
a very sharp criticism of well, it does he does criticize like specifically American democracy, but he makes sure that you know that, like, by the way, like, this applies to a lot of to like European CNWL and just democracies as a whole.
Yeah,
I
it's the
think
important thing to remember. Democracy is bad. It doesn't work.
I think he kind of like what I like about this piece is he kind of like shatters this whole liberal idea of like how governments respond to change, right? Like that they're like some kind of vessel to be taken over by the popular will to enact like whatever it deems good or whatever. And he just looks at like the material interests of the state and like, okay, why did they pull out Vietnam, right? I like that part.
Yeah, and
then
the reason he's able to do that is because he's seen this before. He's seen the what like this whole idea of like just taking over the state and running it for your own purpose does. And it wasn't even because of Bolshevism or Lenin. It was because what happened is his home country in the SPD. Cherry, could you read the first paragraph? So, just so we get, because one of the things about Paul Mattick that needs to be said is he's a very fierce polemicist, but the thing is, he can back up what he says. So he has a polemical tone, but he uses it to drive
to read the first paragraph. I would be delighted, because the opening line is one of my favorite. Like, you've had me on a theory kick a bit, and this is my favorite opening line of any piece that you've given to me.
He's a great writer. Actually, wait, before we read that, can I read wait, I just had it pulled up. Give me a second, Max.
Why don't I read it, and then you can hit me with what you've got next.
Read it. I'll read the next.
This is just a few sentences. Reflecting on the New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt once said that his government, quote, has done everything that Hitler has done, but by other means, end quote. These other means, however, were not able to overcome the Great Depression, which occasioned the large-scale governmental interventions in the American economy. It was finally only to the resort to Hitlerian means, that is, participation in the imperialist war, which overcame the unrelenting crisis. Still, the internal situation in America differed greatly from those prevailing in the fascist nations. The United States remained democratic, not only ideologically but also practically, with an absence of terroristic measures. A social consensus and an efficient prosecution of the war could be assured without much interference in the customary social and political institutions. To be sure, there were some violations of civil liberties, such as the incarceration in the concentration camps of Americans of Japanese extraction, but by and large, the arbitrary discriminatory actions on the part of the government were not comparable to the dictatorial policies of the totalitarian regimes. The manufactured mass hysteria of World War I reappeared, of course, but in a more subdued fashion. The actual outbreak of the war united interventionists and isolationists behind their war-happy government. The acquiescence of the population was obvious, and in part based, no doubt, on the intuitive recognition that the war would bring the Depression to an end.
Yeah, and the reason you'll notice, he also closed out the piece with the mention of war. The reason for that is, in Marxist theory, a great way to get the economy running again is mass destruction of capital. And what destroys a whole lot of shit? War. So, in terms of crisis theory, that's that's a big tenet. In about every Marxist crisis theory, you'll find that's kind of that's the hidden key to be by the way, that's a very big motivator for war, and that's why it's quite profitable in a fucking weird sense, because it restarts the cycle. So it's a stabilizing mechanism in capitalism.
We should I want to clarify because I feel personally that this point is sometimes a little bit over belabored.
Mm-hmm.
That the yeah, it's true that war is one of the things that can sort of lower the organic rate of organic composition of capital and increase profitability on those things. But there are other
Mm-hmm.
ways for this to happen, and the only reason I bring this up is because people just occasionally get a little too excited about the
Yeah.
idea. This is
Yeah. I
global
like,
warfare is like coming. That's blah blah blah. It's a little apocalyptic.
but it is something to keep in mind, and
Yeah.
especially for someone who lived through World War One and World War Two. Well, yeah.
Maybe the real accelerationists were the friends we fought along the way.
Oh, by the way, the quote I want to read is a testament. So yeah, it's Max Eastman, who's like known as like someone who translated Trotsky's works, like his History of the Russian Revolution. So here's what he had to say. So he referred to Mattick in both complimentary and critical terms as a man who thinks his own thoughts, but also as the only one true blue bona fide Marxist in America. He suggested to Cavleton that perhaps they could find another writer to produce an American and human rendering of Mattick's ideas. Mattick's mixture of high theory and bad writing touched a sensitive nerve. Christ, what a writer, and what a god-awfully cumbersome way to say a few simple things. It ought to be published somewhere as an illustration of how to not to present Marxism to America. Eastman, though, was generally supportive of Mattick despite these sharply worded criticisms. So that the piece we're reading now is the end of his life, but keep in mind he did go from like being in Germany and writing and speaking in German to like having to learn English. So, and even then, like his old
Maddock
pieces,
writes like a German. I'm sorry.
yeah, he does,
He
but
writes like a German, and
yeah, but
that's not his fault.
he willingly forgot German to learn English better. But he did acknowledge that he doesn't write good. He does say like I think at the end of his life that he just didn't like write English good enough. But he lost his German, so
I don't know. I didn't think this was that bad.
no, this isn't bad. No, this is very clear. Like when Bang says
Yeah.
German, it's not the bad kind of German because it's clear that he had to work on his concision.
No,
I
Germans
think
just
it's
have a particular way of writing that's very kind of
Mhm.
distinctive, and it's noticeable, but
Long
it's
run
not.
on long run sentences, but they
Oh
kind of
yeah,
work. They kind of work though if you take the time to just read.
a lot of run-on sentences. Well, what we would think of as run-on sentences. Modern English writing really prizes short sentences, which I think is bad.
Yeah.
But at least they're not French. Oh boy, French writing. Woof.
I can't read French, so I am free of this curse.
I can and I don't
Yeah,
willingly.
it's French authors because of like sorry, this is a tangent. Because of all the ways that you can like condition like pronouns and stuff, it's pretty easy to tell what you're talking about over like a long period of time without ending a sentence. So French authors will, I say pretty easy relative to English. So authors will occasionally write just an entire like page of that's one sentence.
Yeah. A lot of semicolons.
Oh God.
Yeah. And actually, right, to go back to the piece, one of the interesting things is, well, there's a reason Maddox does this, both rhetorically and he has reasons theoretically to do so, is the next paragraph, he just like, immediately leads into like talking about fascism, right? And the thing is, like the actual like back in the day, like fascist like there's like the famous like there's a famous like a few lines by Mussolini just praising Keynes or whatever, and like people at the time like just perceive like Keynesianism as like fascist economics, right? Which is like overbroad, but when you start digging into the like well they had like different theories like the Italian fascists had different theories of like the German fascists, the National Socialists, quote unquote. But when you start digging, you find there's the thing is there's only so many ways you can be a money crank, right? And Keynes at the as Mattick says in his Marx and Keynes book, he just says he's kind of just reiterating an old habit of like money cranks in his theory. He's just like he's really good at it.
If only there was a group of people who were totally cranked about money today. If only we had a group, an economic. Let's just make a little connection to the modern day.
Well, actually, I'm gonna make a because we're about okay. So the funny thing is if you dig deep enough, you start to find that like for example, modern monetary theory, right? When you start to dig like into their roots, you just find that the Chartist theory, right? The Chartist theory, right? And guess who was into Chartism? Our old friend Ferdinand Lassalle. In fact, that was his Chartism was theoretically was the way he talked about it was basically to just construct like socialism in one Germany, and just like would use like basically try to mass power and then just use that to make the currency.
Anyway.
So yeah, he said, nodding and retaining nothing.
Yeah, I want to get back to the Mattick piece because we've so far managed to get one paragraph.
That's the background. So the translation that of like talking about FDR and fascism in very similar terms. There's a reason for that.
Yeah,
anyways.
It's such a shame that the base of yesterday's dreams are the pinnacles of today's.
Yeah.
Wow, Bhang, that's really depressing. That hurts.
Although, like, it's actually probably even worse because, like, we already had like you know, that going on with the new left, right? So now we're like, it's 2 or 3 levels of cope on top. So we dream about the old days where we had dreams about like thinking Keynesianism is like leftist or something.
I am every day coping in the trash can.
Yeah.
All right, back on track.
I really like how hard this piece hits. In particular, in the second paragraph, it's got this great line. Emerging out of economic crisis, fascism was an attempt to secure the threatened capitalist system by political and organizational means. And I think people meme a little bit with the whole like SocDems are actually fascists kind of thing. But I do think that this is an interesting parallel to the liberal system with the fascist ones.
Well, the fascist one, interestingly enough, yeah, right. It reminds me of a Bordiga quote, and the quote is, "Fascists stole one of the best means of." What was the actual quote? Well, the actual content of the quote is like Bordiga's being like, "The fascists stole organization from us," right?
Yeah, that's fair. Like the fascist, like there was like this whole.
Mussolini was like
China. They called it like the Kuomintang called it like the party state, like the idea of the state and the party being like super united. And you saw a lot of that in the 20th century. You see that less so these days.
Because it's not required.
China still has like the Communist Party of China or whatever, the CPC, and like that's
but they brag about the fact that they're diffuse, right? When their own propaganda, they're like, yeah, we're not like the old Stalinists. We're actually decentralized a little bit, and like we gather like the way they talk about the.
It's just a little. It's just the party no longer has so much. It's no longer like the party promulgates an idea. I don't know if it was ever like that in China. I don't want to like get into
and
this.
And later in the piece, the way he talks about the American democracy, and like I think in one paragraph he just like basically just sends like 90% of like the Twitter leftists to like go sit in the corner.
Yeah.
Would you like to read that? Can you find where that is in the piece?
Oh right, yeah, like because I have a lot of highlights.
As my old professor would say, where is that in the text?
I think I'm gonna find it.
I had a few quotes that I posted myself. I'm not sure if it was any of those. There's one part about like
I found the quote, but yeah, continue, Elyssa.
Yeah, there's one part about like the um, kind of the function democracy plays, and like that like it's only like used because it's considered an asset, right? Like, and
Right, and it can be like he says there's a like one killer quote he all right, yeah, right, I can't find out. I'm gonna read it. So I think that that's near the end of the piece. It's not actually the other quote I want to read, but quote, "It is true, of course, that American capital is not needed to foster authoritarian regimes in countries in which it does business. These nations adhere to dictatorial principles on their own accord. Most likely, the American capitalist would be more comfortable operating under circumstances more akin to their own, but they're also realists and accept the world as it is. Democracy is not essential to making money. They are also quite ready to enlarge their capital under democratic conditions."
yeah, I mean, I feel like that should appeal to someone who's like, I'm an anti-imperialist, right? Like,
Yeah,
I
which is
mean,
another reason I chose this piece is like you will hear this means like left comms are like don't care about imperialism, and it's like no wait, they don't care about like anti-imperialism from like the 60s reheated and then just like stir fried 3 times over.
And it's like part of this certainly is that like if you're like the um if you're like into the anti-imperialist thing, like why does anti-imperialism mean like supporting random countries that are fully integrated
Yeah, it's
into imperialism, like Ethiopia? Just like you see these like PSL rallies in favor of like the Ethiopian government, which is in this deeply stupid and miserable civil war of its own creation, and it's like why are we why are we doing this? Like why are you you know?
I mean,
well,
yeah,
it's
I think for a lot of the more people on the ground, the more normal, insofar as we can be normal, engaging with this, normal people engaging with this. I think a lot of them are just like they conflate the government with like the population overall, right? Like even if they won't admit it, if you look at their actions, right?
and
Like supporting the Ethiopian government, right? They won't defend the actions of the Ethiopian government. They will go like, look at the conditions of the Ethiopian people. We need to help them. We need to support them.
and also what are we talking about people, because people is never just a whole, and it's like a lot very complicated, right? Just like I'm just gonna hint like at the Luna Oi rice patty thing, like class composition in different countries is fucking weird, and there's a lot of like intricacies like you won't pick up on unless like you've like you've been led by like on a good path, like kind of like get a feel of certain things that aren't like obvious.
Yeah,
So when you're talking about like a people, like which peoples, because also there's like the indigenous populations, right, everywhere in a
yeah,
way.
yeah.
So
Or
like,
like
are you talking about the
illegal,
dominant? Yeah.
illegal immigrants in the US, right? Do they
Hmm.
count as the people? Like, I mean, they contribute to the economy, but like they're not like integrated as like civilians. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's very frustrating because like you have to point to their actions, right? Like this is like you're you're conflating it like in your actions, but like they'll just say like, oh no, but I realize there's a difference, and then they go and do stuff like that anyway, where they implicitly conflate the two, and like uh, play defense for like a government based on like the condition of like its population. Like it's very frustrating to deal with.
Well, the thing is, like, some people believe in Bitcoin, some people believe in magic, like protesting does something, or like, I don't know, like protesting to like support the government of like a third world nation, which like may or may
Yeah, I
not
mean,
just be like just part of like a political struggle, which you actually don't understand and doesn't map onto like simple left or and right, and it's just also
I mean,
like there's actually no good like no good political party to actually support, or at the very even just be like actually these are probably like the better option. And
I
it
mean,
happened
I
in Peru
can't.
too. Like, you remember, like, when the fucking Dengists, and also the DSA were, like, soy-facing over,
Pedro Castillo.
yeah. And it's like, oh, wow, well, I think, like, now he, like, basically, like, gave up on, like, even calling himself socialist or something, and just, but he's still not popular, and, like, the right-wingers are still calling him a fucking commie in Peru, even though,
and
like...
it's also like with Cuba. You see this in Cuba, where like the Cuban government is not interested in doing socialism. The Cuban government is interested in getting the Americans to stop hating them, so they can sell American tourists.
Yeah, which is like,
so they can sell American tourists tchotchkes. And
guess what? I'm not against fucking sanctions on like basically anyone, because it's fucking stupid. It's just...
Well, you mean you're not for? Like, yeah, like
For
no one
forcing,
supports.
yeah.
No one's like for like Cuba, but it's also not like 1960.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, I'm just against sanctions and period. I think
Yeah,
I think it's basically pointless.
Oh, America should like fuck up the Cuba. Like some people think like this take that's like America should fuck up Cuba because they like betrayed the revolution or some shit. It's like that's not the case. It's just that I don't care about defending the Cuban.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
that's very weird. I think like that's like.
Well, actually,
no, go ahead.
I should read this part because there's it's a banger. I think it says like in one paragraph what like a whole lot of people need to hear. All right, quote: the relegation of all decisive economic and political power to the hands of capital and its government has not yet destroyed the myth of American democracy. People can vote, and those who vote, about half or less of the eligible population, can exchange a Democratic administration and presidency for a Republican administration and presidency. That is, they can exchange one set of people for another, equally determined to maintain the system, which, in turn, determines the range of their own activities. Thus, although big business dominates the United States and cannot be dislodged short of destroying the capitalist system itself, it continues to address its authoritarian rule in democratic garb. In fact, the more the ideology of democracy is nourished, the less bearing it has upon reality. Originally, political democracy was the goal of the emerging capitalist class and came to express the political aspects of capitalist competition, without ever concerning itself with the exploitative class relations upon which the whole capitalist edifice rests. Like, and then he goes on to like to go on about like European nations being like, actually, you're not like free of this, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's kind of it's very basic if you think about it. What he's saying, right? Like,
yeah, and he then talks about the component of the like. I think he like one of his big theses, like the illusion of democracy is nourished by like the sort of like spectacle the middle class engages in, that like no one like actually fucking believes in. Well, it's almost like this exact thing where like you don't believe in it, but you still believe in it regardless. Like you don't have a fucking choice. That's like the power of.
Yeah, I mean, he talks a bit beyond this, which I think is kind of related about how like the in the like the unions are kind of institutionalized, right? The organized working class has been institutionalized, and I think that like.
And in fact, they're a product of class collaboration as the project that was the New Deal.
Yeah, and I think
and people don't understand that like you like it wasn't. It basically the New Deal that like repressed radical labor in favor of like institutionalizing labor into like into like certain unions, and that was for Mattick. That sets up what happens during neoliberalism, where like that just gets fucking gutted, because at some point you run dry and you get the profitability crisis that hits in the 70s, which he predicted because he went into Keynes and it was like, this doesn't check out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like he talks about how like the like the middle class. I think there's a quote I have about this.
Do you mean there's a whole paragraph, but just like two sentences. The kind of politics carried on by the elements of the middle class do not transcend the capitalist system. Even in their limited sense, they remain purely ideological, since there is no material force behind them.
Yeah,
Still, as long as they are allowed to assert themselves, democracy appears as a reality with some effect on the course of events. This illusion supports a monolithic rule of capital.
yeah. I mean, if and a part further, there's no need to
Yeah.
remove the democratic safeguard, even if this should prove inconvenient at times. In any case, it does represent a danger that could not be met by ordinary means of government oppression. The democratic forms are thus maintained as an asset rather than as a liability of capitalist rule, yet kept in bounds by the changing needs of the latter. This often leads to violence based on the one side on the illusion that it is possible to divert the government from a particular course of action through the assertion of democratic rights, and on the other side on governmental assertion of authority in response to protest. Yet, after each such emergency, American democracy finds itself restored. So, like, this is, I, I think this is like exactly right? Like, he's essentially, to me, what it
That's
seems
also
like he's saying,
that's also
like,
Bordiga's point that the democracy and fascism are like kind of like two sides of the same coin, and like there's like a flip between them, and it's sort of like, but it's not as
yeah,
clean. But like America is a very interesting like application of like if you look at how it works to be like, yeah, actually the left comps had a fucking point about fascism
I think what he, uh,
and
to me,
anti-fascism.
what he essentially seems to be saying is like, democracy is just like the set of rules set by capital to like
Yeah.
engage with it, right? Like
Yeah, and
the
any contrast.
struggle, like the struggle of organized labor against capital, which you have to do through the democratic process,
Mhm.
right? And like if you play by all these rules, right, and you find yourself still being repressed, like at some point it should click, right? It
Yeah,
should
but
click that this is not like
yeah,
uh,
and
this is not a neutral arbiter. This is like
mhm.
the state
and
and capital are like two sides of the same coin in this, or the same coin. I don't know how to
and
say
it's
it. Like,
I
yeah.
wanna push to say like in concrete terms because a lot of times people you start talking about the state, they go into a lot of abstractions about power and stuff. When people say we want to use the state for communism, they mean like we want to work within existing parliamentary constitutional
Well,
systems.
but within constitutional, I think there could be a constitutional order without even a parliament.
Yeah,
Funny
within
that's a funny bit we can chew on.
yeah, I mean like within like existing
Yeah.
within the United Nations, within the internet, you know, there's an
Mhm.
international existing order, right? World Bank,
And
that kind of stuff.
yeah, and
And
the thing is, the reason like Mattick writes this text, right, is one of the basic points to highlight, like, okay, like this, like the center, like of capitalism is America now for historically specific like circumstances that he elaborates on in this text and like several other places, which
yeah,
is like because America went from like a debtor nation to like a credit nation and just like did this whole thing with European reconstruction, the Marshall Plan, which is people don't really talk about, but like that's part of like like that's like some of the stuff like you could say like maybe third world just like touch on, right? But then they just like make it really moralistic and just they over extrapolate, right? That
mhm,
like America just like got fucking lucky and was able to just through like the vast like amounts of land that they got out of just like basically like killing everyone here that were here originally to just like have this nice like expansion of capital and like they I mean at the end of World War II they basically had all the wealth almost in the, of
mhm,
disproportionate amount of wealth like and not just like fictitious just like in physical stuff just there
yeah,
and so you can write that out until the 70s and you control like Europe through like your imperialism
yeah. except for France, which kind of tried to be a little nice with it. But
Yeah,
the
I mean,
U.S. effectively runs Europe at this point.
yeah,
Like,
I mean, if I remember correctly, like during the
well,
liberation
not
of
anymore. I mean, in the
yeah,
Middle East.
not anymore. Well, it's going to break more and more over the coming years. But if I remember correctly, when the Americans liberated France, they were like, "Oh yeah, we're going to denazify, but the Vichy isn't that bad." And it's like it was just because like the goal was like, "Wait, what? What?"
Well,
like,
well, there was a couple of issues, which is that I mean, not to get in a tangent. To put it simply, the U.S. government didn't recognize the U.S. government recognized Vichy France as the French government and considered France to be a co-belligerent in World War II on the Axis. The U.S. considered France to be an Axis power and was willing to work with the Free French, of course, but had no particular like.
yeah,
It was not
but
like
that,
Britain supported the Free French because Britain wanted France
mhm.
to be like an ally
Yeah,
after the war.
and also
So
there's like the Gaul stuff, hijinks,
De Gaulle was annoying.
yeah, annoying. But I mean, honestly, probably look, he did do an epic troll when he came to Montreal. That's all I say.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, but
Um,
the peace.
Yeah,
right, and there's like interesting bits where uh, when he talks about the anti-war movement, and then he leads into like talking, mentioning Nixon in a very interesting way, which has parallels to probably what happened with Trump, but like in a weird
Oh
way.
yeah, I
Stereotype.
really like the whole bit about the Vietnam War. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, he 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 takes essentially what is like a
and by the way,
like
just like he got to like fun story. So his son Paul Mattick Jr. We're talking about Paul Mattick Sr. So Paul Mattick
yeah
Jr. was doing anti-war activism on his on his college campus, and that led to like the FBI visiting Mattick and and his wife, and they were like, "Yeah, no, we fully support our son's activism." Then the FBI came again to see Maddox, and Maddox was like, "You know what? Maybe if you'd fucking arrest me, people would like, maybe it'd be good advertising. Maybe I could like get my papers out." And the FBI probably didn't bother him after that. They're just like, apparently the agent was like very confused because no one would fucking publish Maddox because he basically just,
because
yeah.
all the communist publishers were Soviet aligned, basically.
Yeah, and when you're a council communist and you're like, actually, Bolsheviks and actually even Stalinists are just social democrats with guns, like, they're gonna fucking shut their door. Apparently, Sweezy read a Matic piece and wanted to publish it, but then someone else on his editorial team read it and was like, no, like, actually, he's fucking railing against you in this piece.
That
It's
is a
funny.
very Paul Sweezy moment to not realize when you're getting just completely dunked on.
Yeah, the whole section, the Matic bio, is just like Sweezy just being very like. Sweezy was like the Biden of Marxism. I'm not gonna lie.
Hmm.
Just kind of fucking
like
sleepwalking. Sometimes he's like really funny, and I mean he's had his good moments. Anybody who's like a teacher of Finkelstein probably had a good bone in him or something.
but like the Vietnam the entire part about like the Vietnam
Yeah.
War. I think I like what he does like there. He takes essentially like what is I think kind of like a relic for leftists, right? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
say like, oh, I used to be at the Vietnam War in the anti-Vietnam War protests,
Well, mostly
right?
my
Like
parents or even my grandparents were in Vietnam War protests.
yeah, I mean it's a
Something
huge
like that.
thing for American leftism, I think. Like
Yes,
and
that the Black Panthers.
so to essentially look at that and say like, okay, all the progress you think you've made here is just like the government uh, responding to like its interest shifting due to like various conditions on the ground shifting,
The United
like
States no
and
longer cares
you
enough
then patting yourself on the back for the government responding to changing conditions,
And
like
funnily enough,
it's
Matic, the leftcom is like gives due credit to the Vietnamese, even though personally, he kept like telling people like that like you're gonna be disappointed if you think that these people are socialists. Like
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing, topic to pick because, like, if you just look at it with like clearly, right, it
yeah,
should be a very obvious one where like the
well,
supposed change brought about by leftists is like
well,
entirely illusory because like and that this whole analysis of like how the particular the different administrations and like
I mean, he
um
says it in one sentence. It's like he sums up his whole paragraph in one sentence. Capital itself brought the war to an end, apparently as a response to the opposition at home, but in reality, the expense of the war had lost all proportion with any conceivable future gain that might result from its successful conclusion. Nonetheless, the ending of the war was celebrated as the reassertion of American democracy, as a sign of power of the people as against the government, and even those who at first had endorsed the war as America's commitment to the principle of democracy now joined the celebration. On the internal scene, a similar situation arose with Richard Nixon's forced abdication of the presidency in the wake of the so-called Watergate affair. A corrupt government was replaced by another corrupt government in a political power struggle lost by the Nixon administration.
yeah, I mean, wait, there's like a sentence here I want to read. The war in Vietnam, for example, was generally not recognized as an aspect of American imperialism, but was bewailed as a morally wrong policy
Mhm.
or as a mere
Yes.
mistake on the part of administrations involved in it, which assumedly could just as well have chosen another course of action to safeguard America's interest in Asia, right? So, like, if you look at it just clearly from the outside, like there's so many administrations who have overseen the Vietnam War, and like they've
Well,
all just made this mistake, or they've
yeah.
all just like uh, become in control of this institution in whose interest it is to remain in that war at that particular moment, and like then the guy who gets out the war isn't to be praised because like he just happens to be there when it's in its interest to pull out, right? Like,
Yeah, and like I have like a tome on Vietnam or just it's called like The Best and the Brightest, and it's just like going over the kind of fucking people that were like in charge, and it's just appalling. But it makes sense. Like Mattick just says, like it's basically like a general corruption on part of the military and advisors like enrich themselves because, but that came to a head when like at some point like you can't just grift the military that hard, and at some point that like they're just going to notice like, oh wait, we can't even justify this expense through like basic utilitarian like logic or something.
yeah,
There's
I mean,
also the
it's
fact that the Vietnam War was a military disaster.
It's a
The
military
Vietnamese
disaster, really.
military did clap America really hard. It wasn't just that like, oh, the Americans like the Americans got destroyed in that war, and there was it's very difficult to like look at the to say like, oh, the anti-war protesters achieved that, or like even the left didn't really achieve that. It was the Soviet Union, like the American left was holding college like rallies, and I'm sure that was unpleasant, but but the real damage to the U.S. military that led to like the whole like hippie movement in the military came from the fact that they were losing the war, just on a battle for battle
They
basis.
didn't want to fucking be killed too because
Hmm.
like it's like completely incomprehensible like that like anyone who just like you know like but
Also, I
they're
mean,
just,
not to laud the media too much, but it was also the way that the media handled the leaked documents about the leaked like government documents about the Vietnam
mhm.
War had
Yeah,
a pretty big effect on that. I don't know if you guys have
yeah.
seen this. Sorry, this is just a brief interlude.
Mhm.
I saw a really funny post go semi-viral the other day, and it was from this person who was with their dad on a trip to Vietnam, and a Vietnamese tour guide started scaring the former GIs by
Yeah,
popping out of tunnels.
Yeah.
that
Uh,
owns.
Yeah. That's
what a flex!
I mean, like, yeah, this should fucking hope so.
You were saying, Constance, you were going to say?
What? Wait, did I want to say something? I mean, no, not on this, I think.
I see. Okay, yeah. I just thought that was funny. I just wanted to mention that. Person said that.
Actually, this is actually a good sentence. So yeah, so right after talking about like the lost power struggle by Nixon's administration, he says it's violating usurpation of power on the part of conscienceless politicians. Presumably, an aroused public of the underhanded manipulation of the administration out to secure its perpetuation and defines a fair play. The euphoria created by this fresh sign of democratic power was such as to release a general onslaught which subject the investigatory agencies of government.
I mean, I think that's like again exactly right. Like, I mean, just like, yeah, I mean,
I feel like what this piece is arguing for is that like the state and democracy are one and the same thing, and so like the
yeah,
democratic fetishism is
I
just
mean,
you're basically like, yeah, thank you, and we're just like no amount of like rhetoric will be able to get you out of the impasse that like you've quest to like bourgeois democracy in ways that like you think you're dodging the question, but actually you're not, because you've just like shifted from like thinking that like you need to agitate to vote to like shifting to some other like supposed democratic mechanism that you still find in
yeah, I mean,
society.
this democracy to me is just like the set of rules set up by the state of engagement with it and like and capital, right? Like if you want like a wage increase, you go democratically protest, stand outside with signs or whatever.
Well, you get
If
brought into
you
union, right?
and
And then you're subject to like the union laws, and then also you're subject to the fact that like the people who are actually in unions hate fucking unions because they know what it's like, even though they won't do without them. But like
yeah, I
the
mean,
reason you see like ESA fucking like people just so fixated on like getting unionization up or whatever in America is because they don't fucking know what unions like are actually are like, because they just want to channel people into like bureaucratic like mean grinders that will just turn anybody into fucking an anti-communist at some point. Unless like they go in like with wide eyes and they know that like they're in enemy territory.
yeah, I mean, it's I think it's like I wouldn't say exactly like democracy and state are one and the same, right?
Yeah,
But
but
like
it's
I think
yeah,
democracy is a part of the state, right? And like it has control over that part, right?
it's a
It's
rubber
not just
stamp for the
something.
state.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we can just wield, right? Like it's not like a
Yeah,
fucking
and it's an
Excalibur ready
automatic
for
rubber
us to
stamp.
pull. Yeah, I mean it's not fucking Excalibur ready for like the will of the people to come along and finally pull it out of this rock, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just like a regular set of rules that like it will be used as an excuse, right? Even if like it's not
Well,
valid
he
to
mentions.
break your civil rights, right? Like
Mhm.
to like I I mean it's as much like an excuse for like punishing like uh, non-conformity to these rules as it is like getting people to follow them and buy into them and pacifying all their like frustrations by making them like part of some like
Actually, there's a really good passage where he talks about this.
consensus process, right? Like supposedly.
Yeah.
What what passage?
Um, um, I'm gonna read. All right. Since this period until recently, America was the toast of was the toast of the world, the victor in war, and beneficiary of an unprecedented economic upswing which benefited both labor and capital. Theories were concocted which assured further economic growth and the elimination of the business cycle through state interventions in the laws of the market. True, there remained a residue of misery, particularly with respect to racial minorities, but this, too, would be overcome in time, thus demonstrating the superiority of the capitalist system in its American form. This general optimism created the various notions of post-capitalism, the new techno-structure, and the end of ideology, and the coming of one-dimensional man, all signifying that whatever meager expression of discontent might arise would be absorbed in a truly integrated capitalist society without class conflicts, in which the difference between authority and democracy would have lost its meaning. Like, this, just keep in mind, this was written like right as the 80s were about to hit. Still describes today. Like that's we're talking about like Elon Musk. We're talking about like, I don't know, post-capitalism. That's a Navarro Media or something. Sure. End of ideology. That's our Zizek, and the coming of one-dimensional man. Well, the funny bit is actually Mattick wrote a critique of Marcuse, but Marcuse thought it was like the best critique of his work, and actually Mattick admired the one-dimensional man book, and he just wanted to be like,
One-dimensional man is all right. The problem with a lot of this stuff is like it's not very deep, but it is like it's descriptive.
yeah, it's descriptive, and that's why Mattick wrote his Marcuse critique to just be like, oh, actually, by the way, there's the crisis stuff and the economic stuff we should think about. This isn't like, well, it's the Paul Sweezy stuff, right? Where like, I think it mentions that, that like socialism is like planned capitalism or something, like where like there's a complete confusion with the two. Which, by the way, is also where certain people get their whole fucking confusion. And it's not even the ML type stuff, because the ML type stuff is just like straight confusion between the dictatorship, the proletariat, and like socialism or whatever. So it's just like a next level of brain rot is when you reach like that point, like the fusion of like Sweezy and then Keynes, and then you just mix Hayek, and it's like, wow, actually these people think the socialism is like kind of like the same thing, right? they almost converge on like well, there's your infamous quote that lives rent free in my head. Actually, there's a funny. There's a bit in this text that's literally what you said on Twitter at some point. Right, so he says, well, what opposition flares up from time to time demands improvements of the system, not its abolition, such as a clean government, lower taxes, civil rights, and more recently, the protection of the environment. And your tweet, which was a lot of people just want a government that works and have tricked themselves into thinking that's revolutionary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just true, right? Like,
You see that's a lot with the China fans. Like,
oh yeah, well,
for reasonable, you're like, well, this is everything sucks. Like, can it at least like work? You know, I feel like that's a pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I've heard a story of like someone who used to be a leftcom who just went full G pill and was like, no, like look, you understand, like I believe in communism, and I just gotta fucking believe that G's got it all planned out. So like, just sit back, man, just sit back, like don't stress.
It's better than like.
Yeah, it's actually. It's so much better than like, I don't know,
so much
like,
easier than being afraid.
Than being like trying to be like a genuine, like, I don't know, Leninist or something, and just being like, I don't know, but yeah. And it one of the themes of this piece too is just like I think you call it the morass, right? The 20th century morass,
it's
right?
Like in some ways,
and Mattick definitely like
morass to the 20th century.
He puts like. He speaks of like Lenin, Trotsky,
because like
and
sorry,
Mussolini.
my earpiece.
Oh yeah, right. Because like the way Mattick talks, like he very easily says Lenin, Trotsky,
I think it's kind of an
Stalin,
anti-electoralist piece in a way. Wait.
Well, yeah, of course it is an anti-electoralist piece, but like it's mostly, how to say this, because it's interesting, because if you've read his what he has to say on like the Bolshevik Revolution or like the SPD, his Gatsky text mainly, and then you see this, you see that he's trying to like there's a through line here, but he cut like for example in the case of the SPV, right? It's one of the same patterns of like capital and labor like finding like a compromise and growing together, and then like the labor movement think like becoming very complacent and just like integrated into the capitalist system.
The labor movement was like the integration labor movement is just it's a complicated thing.
Yeah, it's a yeah, it's which honestly, yeah, I want to read more. I mean, I've got like 2 LaSalle biographies just sitting there, and I've got a couple other things. Uh,
Yeah, but I think like yeah, it's I think it's a very good piece. I
yeah,
I
and
read this one today and like the postponed piece yesterday, which was
oh right,
also I think they're both like very like
you should
methodical, right? Like
yeah
I, I mean this is like when people say like I'm a materialist, right? This is what you like hope,
yeah
like this kind of stuff. I
yeah,
mean it's yeah,
but then sometimes they'll just
I
say well
respect what he's doing here.
yeah, but sometimes they'll like what I've seen sometimes like people do with this kind of like Marxism just say well you're being overly deterministic, but ah it's like it's such a wrong way of looking at it because
Wait,
like, when you're presenting something you have to assume some level of determinism in what you're talking about even though if you don't think that like is absolute, right? Because like no one in their right minds will write something especially if something like as like a Marxist who knows like things are in flux and vary with the times. Like no one's going to fucking write something and think like I've said like something and it is completely eternal and you cannot say this like view it within its time or just take it. I just don't know. Honestly, most of the time people start talking about like materialism in the context of Marxism or just like whatever they think they think they've drawn the conclusion that they've drawn from like whatever exposure to Marxism they've had, like it just comes off as fucking stupid. Like
hmm.
right. Should definitely read the Kelsey text, Elyssa. I think you'll like that. You'll see the contrast. Because that's the text he wrote in like the 30s, and this text is like at the end of his life. Oh, sorry.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Overall, I find a lot of this stuff really.
Maybe it's just on my end. I'll rejoin the call. Let me see.
Hmm.
I have to say I find a lot of like a lot of these theoretical discussions, especially the more historical ones, to be a little to be really like at this point I find it really dry. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
I know it's like important or whatever, but I I just when people start talking about like when did the Soviet Union stop becoming communist or like a lot of this stuff. So I want to
Hi.
bring it to like connected closer into like our modern experience, what's going on today, and I think a really big one is that like that this for me I think the development of like a really like revolutionary movement is not going to happen through political organizations. That's just not happening, and the reason it's not happening is because the political organizations that exist were all founded in uh uh
Hmm.
the political organizations that were founded in this period have this is like it's like what Marx called reactionary socialism, the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah.
Obviously that's like a different thing, right? Reactionary socialism for Marx was like noblesse oblige, like royalty wanting to like get back to feudalism when everyone was based and people were nice to each other or whatever. But there is a real movement of there's a real movement of people who want to get back to like how things the good old days, how
The
things
good
used
old
to be.
days. Well, like, why did I? Of course, I opened the Kautsky piece, and I'm like, I want to read a paragraph from it, but I resist. But I actually no, I kind of have to just show like this is him like the decades before. The Matic, I mean. Let me get the right, right quote. Even the class struggle of the workers could serve the needs not of the individual capitalists, but of capital. He's talking during like the growth period of the SPD. The victories of the workers turned always against the victors. The more the workers gained, the richer the capital became. The gap between wages and profits became wider with each increase of the workers' share. The apparently increasing strength of labor was in reality the continuous weakening of its position in relation to that of capital. The successes of the workers, hailed by Edward Bernstein as the new era of capitalism, could, in this sphere of social action, end only in the eventual defeat of the working class as soon as capital changed from expansion to stagnation. In the destruction of the old labor movement, the sight of which Kautsky was not spared, became manifest the thousands of defeats suffered during the upswing period of capitalism, and though these defeats were celebrated as victories of gradualism, they were in reality only the gradualism of the workers' defeat in a field of action where the advantage is always with the bourgeoisie. Nevertheless, Bernstein's revisionism, based on the acceptance of appearance for reality and suggested by bourgeois empiricism, though at first denounced by Kautsky, provided the basis for the latter's own success. For without the non-revolutionary practice of the old labor movement, whose theories were formed by Bernstein, Kautsky would not have found a movement and a material basis on which to rise as an important Marxian theoretician.
Yeah,
It's- So we are
It's
taught.
really fascinating to me. This whole this whole idea that this success of the labor movement is really its defeat. I think that really sort of
Well, and
seems to be the heart
the
of that
conditions of like
message.
Germany, right? Because Germany's like coming out of like it's how to put this. Well, the whole oh god, we're not going to open the topic of the quote unquote democratic republic. I'm not ready for this. Oh god.
well, I think
But
I actually was going to say that I somewhat disagree with this. I think
hmm,
that it was not like the victories of gradualism or whatever were not like did not lay the groundwork for the defeat of the working class in like the 1970s. The working class was
wait, no,
functionally
that's I'm quoting
defeated in the Second
I'm
World War. Like that was
no,
the
that's what I mean.
yeah.
I'm quoting the Kautsky piece now. I was quoting Kautsky piece to
Oh yeah.
relate to yeah. So it's talking about like leading into World War One, like the whole like but
Yeah. But
just yeah.
the working class was really truly trashed in the world wars. I mean,
Yeah, World War One was a fucking butchery. Like
I mean, oh, I'm also going on. I'm also thinking about like the sort of the genocides and stuff that happened in
yeah,
uh World
which
War
were like
II, and it's
basis for the what came next.
mhm, I don't know.
And
There's an interesting thing in there about a lot of there were a lot of Marxists there who were like against like the principle of German collective guilt. There's a lot to think. There's a lot to like the way I think the way we remember World War II has become really toxic in leftist like left wing circles.
mm,
Um, just because the World War II is remembered as this like great heroic crusade against fascism when
which is completely that's just
which is
historical.
it's more
Like
complicated than that at least.
don't ask Stalin what he thought about Jews personally, or don't ask
Yeah.
if he should bomb the train tracks to Auschwitz or other sort of places.
The train tracks thing is a slightly different issue. Um, I've actually read a piece on that. There's a lot of discussion about that. There it apparently was actually considered, but the issue is that the bombing a train track with World War II bombers and bomb sites does not take the train track out of commission. It
No.
can be relayed pretty easily, and they made the decision that they were going to try and bomb logistics hubs and factories, for a number of reasons, but because the idea was like what will shorten the war. So
Right.
I'm not sure
No.
if that was the correct answer. You know, obviously, Allied bombing leadership is not the
Well,
most
seemingly
reliable
that's
group of
like
people.
that's the whole thing. But there's plenty of like examples to like kind of show that like it wasn't about saving anyone particularly. It was kind of like incidental,
Yeah,
almost.
that's true.
At the very
Um,
least, like as like if you're gonna talk about it in like in terms of like history and not like personal like figures and like what they like personal feelings, like it's hard to like shake the impression that it
yeah.
wasn't because they necessarily like disagreed on
I don't. I think few people in Europe would have I do think few people would have been like I think a lot of I don't think the Allies would have supported the genocide of the Jewish people.
No, I
Obviously,
don't. I don't think so either. But it would have been rather like complacence and just being like, actually, wait, why are you fleeing? Just go back on your boats.
yeah, it's exactly the same thing that's happening now with like the
Yeah.
refugees. You
Mhm.
know, it's exactly the same thing, and it's exactly the same the entire European order bears a collective guilt
Yeah.
for the Holocaust. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't know.
Yeah, like I noted in France, it's like the whole complexion to be like, wait, but we had like the resistance or
The
whatever. But
French
like,
resistance didn't like
no,
that.
like
The
wait,
French
like
resistance didn't like exist. I'm sorry.
and like
Like I mean, the French
all
resistance
the
existed, but it wasn't like it was.
I mean, all the communists was like a good part of like the communists would like just end up getting fucking shot. Were just knew they were disobeying like the orders of like their communist party. Like,
Yeah,
like they were not doing it for the communist party. They were doing it beside like against it or just besides
because
it to be like
the PCF. Well, the PCF was banned in 1939 by the French government, not by the Nazis. And so
yeah
when Germany invades France in 1941, uh, when Germany invades France in 1941, it's not a how would you say this? They're not the Communist Party because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Communist Party is
yeah
not necessarily really opposed to German invasion because the Germans are just the neighbors, and the other guy. It sounds with the retrospective history, it sounds like a horrible thing to think. But when you think about the time, if you're a communist and you're like, well, the French government is like actively trying to kill me, and
yeah
there were even cases where Germans would basically support French labor unions against the French government just to troll, just to fuck with the French, basically. Like French workers would be striking, and they could go to the
Mm,
German military commander and be like, hey, like we need our leaders are like evil, and the French German commander would be like, haha, yeah, that'd be funny. Um,
mm,
and
yeah.
the whole point of that is to say French like the whole question of like collaboration versus resistance is really a
That's
patriotic one created to
yeah, that's the
legitimate a particular image of France.
that's
And
the goal. That's the brilliance of
yeah,
the goal. He was like, you can I think he, I think it's, I think he probably knew in his heart of heart of like, oh fuck, like we actually are pretty fucking guilty of this. But it's like, wait, I've got a whole lot of fucking dead commies who like were actually kind of like nice people, right? But they weren't even
mhm.
following the Communist Party, and it's like, oh, well, I've read my Plato. I know a noble lie, and it's like there you go. And it's like I can't exactly fault them for that. Especially that's part of like making sure to just like get Vichy out.
Yeah, the Darlan scandal. That's
Wait,
a whole
wait, the Durlan scandal?
that was an American thing. When the U.S. invaded, Francois Darlan, who was like a Vichy-aligned admiral, he was the governor of Algeria for Vichy France.
Oh
And
right.
when the U.S. invaded, it was with there was it happened all with sort of the tacit agreement of Darlan, and Darlan was in exchange. Darlan was allowed to remain like administrator of Eisenhower allowed Darlan to remain administrator of Algeria,
Oh, and funnily enough, this is the
and
thematic piece we were discussing
this
does
caused a
mention
scandal.
Eisenhower.
This caused a scandal uh, because Darlan was a Vichy aligned fascist, and the American
Mm,
press was like what are we doing here, folks? Like, what's the point
mm,
of this?
yeah,
Which, if you consider how the American press is now, you know,
yeah.
it's a pretty
I
big
mean,
difference, actually.
I mean, it's just kind of funny that like you remember the Ben Shapiro interview on like BBC where like the fucking the like arch conservative guy eugenicist is like asking basic questions and Shapiro is flipping out. Where like it's like I don't think the guy was even like it wasn't even because of, uh, it's just Like, people who just like fall apart the moment you even ask like basic questions are the funniest. Well,
Yeah,
it's not even that you ask basic. You ask like basic but incisive questions, and then you start to see them dance, and it's like, oh, I've got a live one.
for real.
Well,
I
yeah,
feel like we've gone for a long time and we're kind of like rambling. I think it
yeah.
was first.
A
Well,
little bit.
it did fit.
Oh,
Well,
hold on. Let me,
funnily
let
enough,
me.
in this text, he does mention Eisenhower like being part of like shooting at like or like repressing like the unemployed like military.
Yeah, it was Derlon. Sorry, I just wanted to Google that and make sure that I wasn't like completely lying of defaming some poor innocent
Yeah,
French
no lefty
admiral.
misinfo.
Yeah, no left wing misinformation about the Second World War.
Right.
Well, let's bring it home, boys.
Let's bring it home. What did we learn today?
What did we learn today?
Never trust the
Um.
French.
Yes, I can't exactly disagree with that, but I would say what would be a good way to sum up this text. I would say be be very on guard with like it's very easy to get caught in the motion and thinking the motion itself means you're doing something that's like relevant, right? I
Hmm.
feel that like because I do know from reading the biography to Mattick, like he 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 definitely tried to like try to like red pill a couple of like new left type people and just like kept butting heads to be like, oh, these people just really like certain like national liberation projects and that's it. And he kept telling them, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be disappointed. Oh, you want to do landscaping for the new government? You're going to be disappointed. And
The funny thing is these people are never disappointed. That's the issue, really.
well, they
They're
don't show it.
never
Yeah,
they're
they're
never
like,
disappointed when the government just completely lies to them and they get totally screwed. They're always like, yeah, no, it's like it's actually they always find a way to cope,
yeah. Well,
which is
there's
very
it's
admirable in some ways, I
yeah.
suppose.
Well, it's possible that in their private moments, there's like that twinge to be like, oh, to like be aware
No,
of
there
it.
isn't. There isn't because they don't know
There's
what they're talking about. They want things to
yeah.
be better. Socialism is good thingsism, and
Yeah, yeah, and one thing you'll get from like reading Matic, socialism is not when government does stuff or when good things are good or like whatever.
hmm
And
and the thing
that
to
Frankly,
keep
I'm
in mind
shocked.
is that if you ever feel so much as a twinge of affection for any country, you're a
or
fascist.
states, yeah,
You're a fascist.
yeah. I'm starting to get pretty fucking red pilled in that position. Yeah, I have.
Something patriotic socialism? Question mark.
Oh, this is the anti patriotic socialist piece. Like you give that to Coffin and it's an instant heart attack.
He's like, what Jew wrote this?
Jesus Christ.
For the record, Caleb Maupin. Or if you're listening to this in 20 years, Caleb Maupin is an anti-Semitic journalist, supposedly, who like writes just slag
Oh, he? Yeah, they
for
just
the
released a piece in Platypus Society, and is the biggest schizo thread I've ever fucking read.
yeah.
It is.
He's a not only is he a bad person, he's a bad communist and a racist and stuff. And so yeah,
Yeah, and of course, super patriotic and just. It's
he
so funny
loves
that
he
like,
loves Russia and he loves.
well,
Why aren't
there's not
why
a
aren't you being
nation.
patriotic for America? Come on,
No,
man.
imagine being patriotic for Gaddafi. Imagine being patriotic for but like he says it, Iraqi like Ba'athist socialism, like everything. There's
Gaddafi would
no,
fucking murder him in a heartbeat.
no, but you know what this is? This is it's just the old Sturzo thing, the Nikolai Sturzo thing, where it's like you just love every kind of fucking nationalism, like and actually National Socialism is a very positive thing when you don't abbreviate it.
Hmm.
I guess what Sturzo was just you know Leninist. He quote unquote became a Stalinist when he just saw North Korea and was like, wait, I can build a fucking fascist like totalitarian state and just have myself as like a head honcho. And also I'm like kind of like Epstein too, but we're not gonna get into that.
All right. Let's wind it down. Let's
Yeah.
close it
Yeah.
out here.
No Epstein episode today.
Yeah, do not ask what do not ask the Social Democratic Party in Romania what happened to all that fucking money. Or you'll get fucking shot.
Worst mistake of my life.
Yeah. So I do think to give an honor to the the Proposal Roundtable former podcast should do an episode on like Romania or so, but that's gonna be
All right,
that's gonna be spicy.
let's close it out.
Yeah.
Everyone.
So
Thank
yeah,
you to
the
everybody
piece
who
is
participated.
Paul Mattick, Authority and Democracy in the United States. You can find it on Marxist.org. You can also find his biography. It's called by Gary Roth. It's called Marxism in the Last Century. Anyways, this one's Constance.
Yeah.
Lauren.
Bhang.
And Elyssa, internet kind of went out, so kind of cut out at some point. That's why she stopped talking. Yeah, rip to a G.
R.I.P. R.I.P. to a real one.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna go rip this fat load. Wait, what the hell did I just say? I was about to say something. I was about to say like some like shitting like a fart joke, and then I said
that's
like
unbecoming of a communist to discuss bodily functions.
I can't believe this.
No, but no, I just messed up the delivery. We could cut that out in editing. We'll cut out on editing.
Sure.
Good night.
Good night.